Hi, I'm Ashley Tiffany. I'm project manager at BlueSpark. This session is called How Changing Our Estimation Process Took Our Project Endgame from What the F to For the Win. So a little about myself. Before I begin, I recently, well, I guess not that recently, a year ago, I moved to Chicago after living in Paris for 14 years. And I've been working with Drupal for about 4.5 years now. I originally started working with Drupal as e-commerce manager for a luxury jewelry company while I was living in Paris. So my role there was to manage their e-commerce sites and take care of all the orders and customer service and updates and product updates and that site happened to be built with Drupal 6 with a beautiful Flash front end. So it was great because I couldn't actually update anything. We relied on our developers at our web agency to push any changes that we made in the back end live. It's kind of frustrating. So while I was working there, I had an opportunity to begin doing some freelance work, just kind of on the side, doing QA with BlueSpark, and so that's how I got onto the BlueSpark team, and that kind of evolved after a couple of months into a full-time position. And so yeah, I've been project and transition manager at BlueSpark for like 2 years now, a little even more than that, 2.5 maybe. I'm also, I don't know if anybody contributes, but I have been contributing as project manager of the Whiskey Initiative for Drupal 8. So that's been really interesting because, obviously I learn a lot from working with our clients and on client projects, but I'm also learning a lot from working on this totally different type of project where there's no budget to manage, there's kind of a timeline, and all of your resources are people who are just, donating their time, so you can't really rely on them. But it's been a really, really interesting and enriching experience. It's great, working with the community. So I'm going to sit for the rest of this. Sorry, but that would have been the About Me slide. There we go. So anyway, let's get into our actual subject matter. The reason why you came. So the ideal project budget. What is that? Is that something that actually exists? I think that most of you would agree that it's very elusive, and it looks kind of like that. Endless piles of cash, and that way you can just use your development magic and build whatever your client needs. So that would be great, but it's not very realistic. The reality is most of your clients are working with a budget, and so that means so are you. So, while we don't necessarily like it, your clients are working with a budget, and so that means that the project generally is going to be on a fixed bid, with this budget in mind. And their budget needs to cover all of the features that they have in their requirements. So that's great, except often this is the real budget. It can, it's often not as much as you would like, and not as much as would be best to be able to build everything that they want and that is in those initial requirements. But it makes sense. A lot of clients have more of a corporate setting where they have to go through kind of lengthy internal processes. I saw that when I worked on the client side. You're in the web department, you have this project, you come up with the requirements for it, your project objectives, you write those up and you come up with a number and you take that to the finance department or to the purchasing department or whoever is holding the purse strings. And the goal there is to get them to accept and to actually give you funding for this project, because without that, you're not going anywhere. So the thing is, that means that this budget that then is handed on to you as the agency generally doesn't come from an agency and from somebody who knows what this is going to take to build. It comes from maybe somebody who's working in the web department there who has based it on a past project that they've worked on. Or maybe it's just some guy in the finance department who said, no, you can't have that much, you can have this much. It's not necessarily realistic, and it often is not the ideal number that would actually allow you to get all of those features. So then you end up in this situation where often you have an RFP that you have to respond to and a fixed bid. But it makes sense. These clients have internal processes to get budget approval, so of course they're going to have an internal process to get vendor approval. And that selection is often done with an RFP. We know how it works. They put out their requirements, the list of what they want, and we have to answer to that with proposals and budgets. So you receive an RFP, and it has lots and lots of stuff in it. So the RFP is a document which the client uses to state their project objectives, and it usually will give you the bottom line in terms of budget. Sometimes, for some reason, clients don't want to tell you what their budget is. And in that case, I would definitely recommend that you push as much as possible to at least get an envelope out of them, because it's very, very difficult to determine the true scope of a project if you don't know how much money they have to build it. So, of course, for that RFP, this is the budget. It's tight. But the thing is, it's up to you as the agency to, if you've decided you want to respond to this RFP, you review the objectives with them, with the client, you discuss, ask questions, and kind of convene internally. Come up with your game plan. How do you see attacking this project? What are your recommendations and suggestions? And then you write all that up in your proposal, and you include a budget. So the budget is generally very important to the client. When receiving proposals, and I've been on the other end, you receive a proposal, sometimes you look at the first page, and then you turn to the budget. That's what's important. It's kind of the first two pieces of information. And then once you've checked the budget and, okay, they're not over, then you can go back and actually look at how these people are proposing to work on your project. So the problem with that is, at this point, you've had maybe a couple of meetings. So, it's a beautiful budget. You spent a lot of time putting it together, but it might as well look like that. What it is a bunch of numbers based on assumptions. So the thing is, assumptions or not, the budget is important to the client. And what they're looking for is to see with that budget and with your proposal that you can meet their stated objectives within the budget that they've given you. The actual numbers that you have put in that budget, like 5 dev hours here and 10 design hours there, are not really that important at this state. The money's going to end up somewhere. It's going to be divided up into the different teams on your project, and it will be used obviously for the project, but it doesn't really matter if, it's 5 hours here or 10 hours there. It's not important at this point. So, the client really is looking at the end number in the budget at this point. And because of that, you need to make sure that as the project continues, you revise this estimate and the project budget with them and review that with your client. Because otherwise, they're still holding on to this first budget from their proposal where you said you'd spend this many hours on this and this many hours on that. And that proposal, or that budget proposal, was sent in response to an RFP that had also a list of features. So we know that as the project goes on, you're redefining these things. You're redefining the MVP with your client. You're redefining their priorities. And so the budget also needs to be redefined. not necessarily the final number of the budget, we've said it's fixed bid, but where the money is going. So that's something that I unfortunately learned the hard way on a project. So we'll talk about that project as kind of a brief case study of how not to manage a fixed bid. So fixed bids are kind of, they're full of traps. There's a lot of easy traps that you can fall into, and that can cause your project to go awry. So a lot of times you'll have clients that will kind of cling to that original list of features that was in their RFP. And they're assuming, no matter what you've said, they're assuming they're going to get all that because, it's in the budget, or it was in the RFP. And the problem is, you have responded to the RFP, so you have implicitly accepted to build those features within the budget that they've given you. But, of course, at the point of the project where you are responding to the RFP, you don't know the scope of the features. So, it's one thing to look at a list of bullet points in an RFP, and it's quite another thing to look at those same features in the form of implementation notes and interaction requirements after full UX has been done. The difference between the two can be cosmic, and both in terms of scope and dev time. So this is the actual RFP from the case study that, well, it's an excerpt of it. It was several pages.
It's the highlight.
So you can read all the wonderful things that were in it. So in this situation, the client here stated in the RFP that they wanted an application process, event management, an online selection process of user-submitted content, image galleries, user bios, event ticket purchasing. There's a blog with archived articles, videos, audio clips, and images, a contact web form with multiple required fields, of course, an easy-to-use backend for their site admins, a robust search across multiple taxonomies, content, and user types, graphic and dynamic search results, e-commerce with multiple product types, and responsive design. So, yeah, I know. So it's a pretty, yeah, pretty much, yeah. So it's a pretty tall order, and it can be done with within their budget, but with a tight budget, as this client had, the ways that these features can be provided are pretty limited. That means that you need to be putting as much out-of-the-box functionality as possible in their site. You're pretty much limited to 0, if maybe 1 or 2 small customizations. Things on a project, with such a long list of features and a limited budget, they just need to be kept lean and simple. But what happened in this project is, as we talked with our client, we realized that the e-commerce that they had in mind was actually pretty complex, and it was going to take, it had a bunch of customizations, it would have required multiple modules working together and custom screens. And so the way that they had envisioned e-commerce was definitely not out of the box, like we're just going to stick your Uber card or, that was not it at all. And basically, the e-commerce that they wanted would have taken the entire project budget to build. And if you don't manage this expectation of budget versus functionality from the very beginning with your client, then you'll end up, as I did on this project, with a disappointed client. So in the case of this RFP, they had this long list of features, tight budget, and we agreed to provide as much functionality as possible within the budget. We started our UX process with them. We went through sketches that became approved wireframes. And the whole way we were defining the priorities with our client. And also we were breaking the different features into multiple phases because, of course, they also had a tight deadline. So we had phase 1 for the first deadline, phase 2, second deadline, phase 3, we'll get to those things when we can, and presumably with additional budget. So, we defined this MVP with them together, got sign off and everything, and then we started building the project. And after like a week and a half or something, we were really quite quick on the turnaround on this project. We were ready to demo what we had shown, what we had started to build to them. So I put together a budget breakdown for the client at that point. So mind you, it's not a revised estimate like I was talking about earlier. It was just a breakdown of, okay, here's project hours to date. Here's how I project the future of this project to look. Looks like we're going to be in budget. We're going to be able to get all of the phase 1 and phase 2 features as we define together in budget. Phase 3, we'll see. Probably not going to happen. So the thing is, when I presented that to the client, their reaction was not what I expected. Here I thought I was coming and telling my client that they had this great managed project. It was on scope, it was on time, it was on budget. And what more could they want? But they were upset because they still thought that everything in that RFP was going to come in at the original budget. I had clearly mismanaged their expectations. They didn't realize while they were making those decisions in meetings that those priorities were affecting their budget, that they were telling me what they wanted to pay to build now, and that in doing so, some of those features were being de-scoped. Phase 3 was de-scoped. So the thing, I of course mentioned the impact on budget while we were in meetings, but I never took the time to revise the estimate, to send that to them, to just clearly put these things on paper. And we never had a specific meeting to address just that topic. These were things that I thought key information about the scope and the budget of their project that I would give to them in these UX meetings. But that was just kind of going in one ear and out the other for them. They're just like, yeah, whatever, budget. We're talking UX. I like this. Let's keep going. They weren't putting stock into what I was telling them because I hadn't placed enough importance on it and on revising that budget and giving it to them as here, no, this is an important piece of information. You need to look at it. Let's have a meeting just for this. So anyway, this is an example of a failed project. It was, as I said, on scope, on time, and on budget, but ultimately that's my daughter.
She really wanted to be here for this seminar. That project was on time.
My client sounds like that sometimes.
Most clients sound like that.
I sound like that. No comment.
Well, I thought that might happen when she saw me. So yeah, it was a failed project, but it was on scope, it was on time, it was on budget, but the client wasn't happy, so that's still a failure. They didn't realize that while we were moving along, they were defining the scope, and so that's on me. Some other common things that can happen in fixed bid situations are when you haven't properly managed the scope and the expectations, is you end up at the end of the project, you're out of hours, you're out of budget, your client still thinks that they're getting this stuff. You've never really said, no, you're not, and so you give away hours, and nobody wants that. Of course, we all want the dev teams to be working at full capacity and on as much billable work as possible. So, it's a drain on resources, and it's a drain on it can be a drain on team morale as well, because what often will happen with projects that are no longer billable is they kind of slip in priority and then they drag on. So anyway, those are an example of what not to do and just some of the pitfalls of fixed bids. So after this situation with that dissatisfied client, there was only happened once, of course. It was all it took for us to say, we need to look at our process and we need to revise this. So So we started asking ourselves some questions. How could we do a better job of being accurate in our estimates? And when we were looking over our process, we decided that the best way would be to integrate 2 new steps in the form of estimate revisions at the end of discovery and at the end of the design phase. And these 2 budget revisions are now kind of incorporated as project milestones. So, in order for us to move on past that phase, we stop, we meet, we re-estimate, and we share with our client. The other question that we asked ourselves when we were looking to fix our process was, how could we do a better job of explaining the effect that decisions made during the design process have on the overall project scope and budget? And here, we realized that we're going to have these 2 new milestones, 2 new estimates, 2 revisions. We need to share that information with our client. We need to really take the time to inform them from the very beginning of the project what the process is going to be. Tell them that we're going to revise our estimate. You're going to be making decisions. You're going to be prioritizing. We're going to give you the tools to decide how do you best want your money spent on this project. And it came down to really transparency with us, just really sharing all of the information that we had with our clients and empowering them to make their own budgetary and scope decisions so that they can define the priorities and the MVP. It's ultimately their project. It's their budget. We're here to help them strategize and design and build it, but they're the people who have to live with the site afterwards. So, it's really important that they be as involved as possible in making these decisions because we can't make them for them. So, we'll look at our revised process in detail. So, the first step in our process is really the kickoff meeting. We kind of realized that it's important to start managing client expectations early on. From the very first meeting with them, you can set the tone. So these meetings are typically pretty informal. We ask the client to define the objectives in their own words. Sure, we've had some previous meetings and we've seen an RFP, but you can really get some surprises when you ask the client, so what do you want? What are your goals? Sometimes things that weren't in the RFP come out. And sometimes things that were in the RFP and that you thought were super important, they don't even mention because it's really not a priority for them. Maybe there's one line that's just in all of their RFPs, but they don't care about that at all. So we start off by just asking them, what are your goals? Then once we've gone through that, the different project leads, the tech lead, the designers, UX designer, UI designer, will all come in with any questions that they have for the client. And once we finish that, then we do a process review. So we'll close the meeting by saying, okay, look, this is how we're going to work together. This is our process. And so this is really the key moment to tell them, all right, there's going to be 2 revisions in this project. We're going to revise your estimate. You are going to make some decisions. You're going to prioritize the features that you want, and just start telling them early that the decisions that they make in the UX process are going to define their MVP, and it will define where project hours and budget are spent. So after that, we begin UX. So we typically do 1, but sometimes there are multiple discovery meetings with our UX designer, the PM, and the client. So our UX designer just kind of gets a handle on the client's priorities and their vision for the site, and he'll try to gauge their user types and some of the frequent use cases. And then after that meeting, he works on developing preliminary sketches. once he has a few sketches, it'll just be like, 2, maybe 3 key pages. Once he has some sketches that he's happy with, we set up another meeting with the client to get their feedback on that. And as soon as we have that feedback, the UX designer goes back and refines his sketches. And so we'll do that, we call this feedback and revision process rapid iterative design. So we try to iterate as quickly as possible, take their feedback, incorporate it, and show them what we've understood from that feedback on paper in the form of updated sketches. So we'll continue to do that. We do multiple rounds until we get to a point where the client is satisfied with what's on paper and we're ready to get into wireframes. But before we do that, we hold what we now have started calling an early tech planning meeting. So this is the first of those 2 estimate revisions. And we explain to the client up front that we're going to stop here. We are going to meet internally. We're going to look at the sketches, and the tech lead, the UX designer, PM are going to work on estimating them. At this point, we do not have full interaction requirements. We don't have full specs. They're sketches. So we're aiming for 40% accuracy rate. Can be plus 40, could be minus 40. We're just aiming for 40% accuracy. So the idea here is, to kind of find out before we get too far into the UX exactly, where do we stand in terms, well, not exactly, but approximately, where do we stand in terms of dev hours? And this will kind of help the client to then focus their priorities as we continue throughout UX and throughout the final wires. So the early tech planning meetings will typically involve the tech lead, UX designer, and the PM. What we do is we sit down, well, we hang out actually because we're all remote, and the UX designer will review the sketches with the tech lead. The tech lead will ask any development-related questions that he has, and as they review, the PM will add tickets into our project management system that cover the bigger chunks of work to be done. So an example would be build the homepage, build event content type, theme the homepage. We're not getting into the details of how it will be built, just the bigger tickets that we know will need to be in the system. So we review, and then the tech lead will determine a rough estimate for each ticket. It's really ballpark at this point. We do try and, if he's thinking 30 to 40 hours, we're going to put 40. We want to try and be on the high end at this point and pare it down later. So the advantages to this is that, after we've done this tech planning meeting, we can tally up the hours, and we can really take stock of where we stand and see, okay, the total available project hours here are 400. We have an estimate of 500 at this point. So that's not too bad. It looks like we could end up completely within the budget on this project. So then what we'll do is we'll hold a meeting with the client once we've finished our estimate internally. And we go over the goals again of that of this revised estimate, telling them plus or minus 40%. We share the results with them. We show them kind of the feature breakdown that we've done. And then we give them the final estimate, and we show them where the project hours are most likely to be going. So again, at this point, we don't have the full interaction requirements, and so it is lacking in accuracy. It's only about 40% we found. But we're trying to identify any key bits of functionality or features that may be taking a disproportionate amount of budget, and see if that aligns with the client priorities. If this one little thing that's not important is going to take 60 hours, and maybe it's not that important, and maybe we should focus as we move into wireframes, we can focus then more on different bits of functionality that are priorities to them and that we don't think will take as long to build. And at this point in the project, the great thing is we haven't lost any dev time building features, so there's no harm done in revising these priorities or revising the sketches before we get into wires. So,
Can I ask you a question real quick? In general, what percentage of your budget is this taking? It's like, do you call it discovery or do you call it pre-discovery phase? What?
so the first tech planning meeting would generally be part of discovery. I can't really say in terms of percentage of the budget. I mean, we found that the first tech planning meeting tends to take about 3 hours, and there's 3 people on it.
But what about all the sketching and the meetings that have happened up to that point? So like that phase, what percentage would you say of your total budget does that usually take? Is it like 10%, 25%?
I'd say it's a good 25 to 30%. It's, yeah.
And you call that not a pre-discovery? you just call it a
Well, for discovery and the next phase, which will be wireframes, our final tech planning that we'll get into, I'd say that is probably a solid 30%, maybe even sometimes 35%, depending on how much detail you need to get into in the UX and in the discovery. You know, sometimes you need to develop personas, sometimes you need to do usability testing. I mean, all of that is going to add a lot of hours to what can be a relatively simple process. It kind of depends.
Depends how many stakeholders are fighting for their piece of the pie as well.
Yeah.
But it sounds like about 50% it's split, 50% development and 50% everything up through development. Is that right?
Hopefully it's more like 60-40, so you still have hours to build the project. But
60,
yeah.
everything up through development?
No,
and then 40?
60 development. And,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How detailed are your requirements prior to the first tech meeting?
So in that tech planning, it's just sketches. There's no written requirements at this point. It's just the sketches. Where you can see the home page. It's going to have a gallery. There's going to be a slideshow or whatever.
There's no written backlog.
No, that comes with our wires.
So you speak to a sketch in level of effort?
Are you what? Sorry.
So what the result of that meeting, the output of that tech meeting is the level of effort to that sketch or to certain features of that sketch?
So, like the tech lead will look at that sketch. They'll look at like a homepage sketch and say, okay, I see, maybe 3 different widgets that I'm going to have to build here. It looks like this is probably its own content type, or so he'll kind of look at the different functionality that he sees within that sketch, and he's just going to give a ballpark estimate. But it'll be refined later. I'll continue with the next step of our process. So moving on, we get then into wireframes. Once we finish that early tech planning, we've shared it with our client, they're okay with everything, then we move it into wireframes. So the wireframe, it will continue then working with the UX designer and the clients. Those sketches are turned into actual wireframes with complete interaction requirements, where that is, it will have all of the written specs, what different boxes, widgets, things on the page are, how do they work, how do you get from here to there. Those are all much more conceptual at the sketch stage. And it's something that when we're in that early meeting, the UX designer is explaining to the tech lead. It's not like he doesn't know what's going to happen. It's just that it hasn't been finalized and put to paper yet. That happens after that early tech planning and once we start wireframing. So, we'll continue working on the wireframes, meeting with the client, making sure that, it still is as they envision things, how they want the site to work, and revising as we go until we get to a point where we have approved wireframes, complete and approved wireframes. So all of the site pages, of course, like identical pages, we're not, you know what I mean. So we have complete in the terms of every single different page template or whatever is wireframed, with full interaction requirements for those. And it's really key to being able to proceed to the next step of our process, which is the final tech planning. So this is where we really get into the nitty-gritty and get the detail in our estimate revision. So what we do is and again, speaking about the client transparency, we explain to the client, okay, we're going to go off and have some internal meetings, we're revising this estimate, we're going to come back to you, and we'll see exactly where we stand. So we meet internally, and the goal here is to determine the information architecture. We take implementation notes as we review the wires and the interaction requirements, and we estimate all of the features with the goal of achieving a 10% accuracy rate. So plus or minus 10% for all of the features on the site. So here's how it works. We'll plan several meetings over the course of a week, 2 weeks if it's a bigger project. Each meeting is about 2 hours long, and the total number of meetings it'll depend on the complexity of the project, but can be 3, sometimes it's 6 or 7. We include the tech lead, 2 developers, a themer, the UX designer, and the PM. So it's generally a very intense set of meetings. It's kind of draining to be in that many meetings for an entire week, but we found that the end results are really, really worth it. So what we'll do is we'll start from the list of issues that we had already added in the early tech planning meeting. And we'll select, I forgot to mention that we categorize those into epics, so kind of chunks of functionality, often site categories. So all of the issues are categorized into event planning or user management or whatever, just different chunks of functionality. So we'll start with one epic, and the UX designer will review the wireframes and the interaction requirements with the team. We do not share the previous estimates with the dev team. Only the tech lead knows what those are.
And he usually forgets.
Yeah, that's speaking with experience. Yeah?
Just as a point of clarification, is that pretty much your whole team that would be working on that project?
It's not necessarily the whole team that will be working on the project, because
Or you chunking it?
we haven't always decided what the actual resources for the project will be.
Okay.
It's kind of like we have our go-to themer for estimates. It kind of we have, I guess we do have one dev who's really, really well-versed with search. So if it's a search-heavy project, we're going to pull him in to help us with our estimates. Otherwise, it's kind of you're not so busy right now, so why don't you do some of these meetings with us and help us estimate? We do consider that all of our devs should be able to review these requirements and wires and come up with estimates. So, yeah.
Do you find that in the case of, like you were saying, you've got somebody who's really experienced in search, and so actually they'd be the person that you put on there, but do you run into problems of they're giving you a estimate based upon their expertise, but then you end up putting somebody different in who is obviously going to take longer because they're not as skilled?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you account for the discrepancy or for the differences?
Well, so that's part of the reason why we have several devs, is that, so maybe we're estimating a search-related ticket. We're not only going to ask the search guy.
Okay.
We ask everybody. So what we do is we review we review the wireframes kind of feature by feature, epic by epic, and we review all the interaction requirements, and the developers discuss. There's a lot of discussion that happens.
If I may add in, sort of the secret sauce here is that you shouldn't get stuck on the idea that it's just estimated. What we found that we come out with after going through the ringer is that we've got a really good start on the site architecture. We're taking notes as we discuss these things. We usually, if you've got 3 devs in the room, one of them is going to realize if there's a big gotcha. Not every time, but enough so that you get the averages working in your favor. And so you're really coming out with both a pretty solid idea of what each chunk of the site is going to take to build, but you're also making those plans. So if the fellow who's really good at search is not on this particular project, that's okay because we've spec'd out the architecture and how that should be built. And it's written down, and they'll have to come back and, what were you thinking when you came up with that number? That you
Yeah.
do that.
So yeah, that's a big part of this meeting is all of the discussion that happens amongst the dev team, where, you know, they discuss what they're seeing in front of them. You know, is this a landing page? Is it a content type? Are we going to use panels or beans or views? I don't know, all sorts of Drupal words. They decide, they come to a conclusion, what's the best way to build this? And then, yeah, we write it down in the form of implementation notes that we will add to the individual tickets, generally after the meeting. It takes a lot of time, so we don't do it while we're in it, but we do add full implementation notes. So when they figured out how they want to build this, then we go around and we ask everybody, okay, so what's your estimate? How many hours do you think? And we'll take the high average of what they say. The PM takes that number, plugs it into the ticket, and we move on. We go through all the tickets in the Epic, and then we go through all of the open epics that we had. And of course, since we do have a lot more definition at this stage than we did earlier, it's kind of inevitable that we end up adding new tickets here. What we do just to be able to kind of track things is we'll say, you know, in a comma, this is a new ticket. And there was no estimate from the early tech planning, because we do like to make a little note of what the estimate was from the early tech planning, so we can compare just later. Sometimes it can be useful to go back and say, oh, okay, yeah, we thought this much, but actually we estimated this much. It can be useful. So we just take
Do
note
you
of
guys actively track your estimates with your actuals so that you can use that to inform your future projects?
So we do on some of the more, I guess, like repetitive things, like we have like a deployment ticket. Like that's something where generally I'll just take an estimate from a previous one. There's no point sitting there and asking the dev team, you know, how long do you think it's going to take to deploy? Like that's something that we can kind of look at experience and pull the hours for. But yeah, we try to look back and use those previous estimates of the actual hours that we came in on for future projects. But at the same time, each project is so custom. There's always, the features are almost never working exactly as they did before. So you can use it as kind of a basis, but it's still really helpful to have this whole process and to be thinking about a specific project when you have to plug in the
more to
numbers.
see like what percentage you guys are usually off. Like, do you ever look at
For the percentage, so the discrepancy, like the accuracy, we'll look at like just the total at the end of the project, not on a ticket-to-ticket basis, because it all kind of evens out. So, sorry. So, at the end of this, we have wonderful tickets that have lots of information in them. They should all have a title, an epic, the estimated hours, a description with complete implementation notes. We have the issues mapped to show any interdependencies, any blockers, and there are links to the wireframes and other relevant documents. So it does take a lot of time in the planning phase to do this, and you may be thinking, this looks kind of waterfall-y. It kind of is. Like, we're kind of planning out all of our tickets before we start developing. But with a fixed bid, it works. So, yeah, the great thing here is that it really does, though, takes a lot of time up front, but it saves a lot of time for our dev team. As Adrian was saying, anybody can kind of like jump in because we have all of those implementation notes. We've already explained how the best way is to build it. The tech details are laid out for the team.
Who writes those tickets?
I write the tickets and she adds the implementation notes.
What are your roles?
I'm PM, she's technical PM. So then, at the end of these very long and intense meetings, we tally up all of our estimates and we see where we stand. We'll review the feature list together and try to identify any key points and key features that we could descope without sacrificing the integrity of the project or other features. And then the PM will prepare a full feature list and hours breakdown for the client. So, the hours breakdown looks like this. It includes the total project hours, the hours that have been spent to date, the estimated hours to complete the project after the tech planning meetings, and the difference between these numbers, between this and the available project hours at this point. So it gives a really clear picture of where we stand and if there's any hours that need to be found. So we present this to the client with the other kind of big deliverable, which is the feature list. So the feature list shows all of the tickets as they have been added, with their title, their epic, and their estimate. And they're broken into epics. So you can see also the estimates for larger chunks of functionality or site sections. So then what we do is we prepare our recommendations, as I said, kind of discussing things that we, this is taking, we need to find 30 hours, whatever. This was 10 hours. We think that this probably isn't much of a priority. Let's recommend descoping this for them. It won't mess up the rest of the project. It's not such a big deal. So we prepare those recommendations. We prepare these two deliverables. And then we come to our client. We present this revised estimate and the recommendations to them. So we'll start this final tech planning client meeting by, again, just going over why we did this and telling them that we're looking for plus or minus 10% accuracy at this point. We do have full project specs. We do have the full wires and interaction requirements. So this is pretty accurate at this point. We know what we need to build and how we are going to build it. We do not go into the detail of reviewing the actual tickets with the client in this meeting, but they have access to this. It's all in our project management system. They can go in, they can read the implementation notes, if they want to. That's all part of the transparency that I was talking about. So, we present our recommendations to them and we share this information of the budget breakdown and the feature list. And, then we come to our conclusion. Either we fit into the budget and that's great, or, we're above the available project hours. Well, we have some options in that case. Either you can descope some of the features and push them to a later phase when maybe, it's another fiscal year and your client has some additional budget. Or, if the client doesn't foresee having future funding or, they really need to get this project done now, maybe they have an internal dev team and you can kind of assign some of the tickets to them and co-build the project. Another option, if all of the features are priority and they really need it built now, maybe they can find additional budget. Maybe they can go back to their finance or purchasing department and say, look, this is exactly how much more I need. This is why. Sometimes that works. We've had clients opt for all three options. So it really depends on your client and their situation. And the great thing here is that, we're putting the decision in their hands. We're being very transparent about where the money is going to be spent, how long it's going to take to build the different features, and letting them make the ultimate decision. So you may be thinking, so they pay for all of this estimating? You're having 10-hour meetings and they're paying for it? Well, yes, because it is technically, it's technical planning and it has really valuable deliverables. At the end of it, you have a clear ticket list. You have all of your implementation notes. You have hourly estimates for all of the features. And the process has really proven to be invaluable for us. It empowers our clients to prioritize, since they know exactly how many hours each feature represents. So the upfront hours required to do these 2 tech plannings and these budget revisions, it is a lot, but it does ultimately save time for everybody involved. I know I've already mentioned that the developers can just jump in. All of the implementation notes are there. And the other thing is it also saves time for the tech lead and the PM when you're planning out project sprints and that, because it's all there. I mean, it's really just as easy as looking at interdependencies, deciding what should be built first, pulling it into a sprint, making sure that the hours aren't, it's not like an 80-hour sprint or something, and starting it. So, and the other thing, the other advantage to taking the time upfront to really think through all of this and how it will be built is that you don't have devs who start working on a ticket, get 20 hours into it, and get themselves completely down a rabbit hole and realize that this isn't going to work. Like, things have been already thought through and laid out before, and so you're not wasting time there. So yeah, there's no wasted hours of building and then rebuilding because we've thought through it all beforehand. So once everybody has, we've shared the revised estimate, client is happy, we've all agreed on exactly what then is in scope and is going into this project at this point, then we can start building the project. So this part of the project should go pretty smoothly because the tech planning is all done, and so you're kind of just ready to go and to build. The dev team has everything they need to get started on the tickets. The tech lead and the PM have everything that they need to quickly plan their sprints. And all the interdependencies in that have been laid out. As you build, as with any project, you may run into some overages on tickets. So there, it's important that if a dev is working on a ticket and he realizes, okay, this is taking longer than I thought, then we first stop, discuss it internally. Are we 5 hours over? Then it's probably not such a big deal because, as I was saying earlier, it does tend to average out. It's plus or minus 10% on all of these features. So sometimes, yeah, we didn't realize we're 5 hours off, but later we'll probably be 5 hours off in the other direction, and it does even out. If it's more serious than that, if it seems that the way we thought we could build this is just not going to work, it's taking way too much time, it's just not happening, then in that case the best thing is to go with transparency. Figure out how long will it take to build this, and then go back to your client and explain to them, okay, we've come across a bit of a blocker here. This is, this is what's happening on this ticket. This is how long we think it will take to wrap it. And then let them make that decision. Again, it's their project. It's in their hands. It's good to empower them and let them make those decisions. As you wrap the project, you should see that an overall estimate accuracy of plus or minus 10% does hold true. So with this process and the kind of integrated client expectation adjustments, you should end up with a happy client who got what they wanted within their budget, and they were informed throughout the process, and they were an active team member making decisions and deciding upon their priorities throughout their project. In our experience, the clients really appreciate this. They appreciate the transparency, they appreciate the empowerment. So when doesn't this work? Just really quickly, because I'm supposed to wrap it up. 2 key scenarios where it doesn't work is if a client is doing UX internally. We had a case like this recently where we thought, okay, we'll just pick it up at our final tech planning stage. They'll give us their finished wires and their requirements, or their interaction requirements. But the problem was their wires weren't complete, they weren't consistent, they kept changing them, there wasn't any written requirements from them at all. We tried to meet with them and figure out, through us asking questions, what those interaction requirements were and write them down, but it just turned out to be a thorny and difficult process. So what we ultimately did in this project is we decided to build based on our assumptions of what they needed from the wires that they had given us, just build kind of a quick and easy, almost like prototype, and then iterate from there. Get their feedback, iterate, update it, all while closely managing and watching budget usage. But ultimately, and we did try to be very transparent with them. We told them why we were doing things this way. Because at first, we were telling them, hey, we're going to do this estimate, we're going to revise our estimate, and then we're like, that's not going to work in this situation. Here's why. We think this is the best way to move forward. They appreciated that, and they agreed, and it ended up working. They were very happy with the site that they got. We were on budget, so there's no need in that case to follow the process that I just described. Another situation where you definitely do not need to go through all of this is if your project is 100% agile and it's not fixed bid. If you're just time and materials, then why bother? There's no reason you, as new features and requests come in, of course you estimate those. Of course, some solid tech planning and meeting with your dev team, it will never be time wasted, but you do not need to go through this whole process that I've just described. Just, be agile. So, yeah, that is it. Now, questions?
I said an overall question. Do you find then as a result that by having this fixed budget, you end up spending a lot more? It ends up costing the client more?
More than what their original budget was?
Well, not necessarily the original budget, but because you have to implement all these different strategies to stay within that budget, that it ends up costing them more?
More than time and materials?
Or just more than, like a...
You mean the profit margin is smaller?
Or just the total cost of the project ends up being kind of...
Or say they get more planning and less
Right.
actual development.
Yeah, and then so it ends up costing them more. Like if you could say, just get
Well, yes and no, because the development is much, it's very efficient.
okay.
Because you have spent all that time planning it, and because you have had several developers look at the ticket and everything, so you're more
So you
efficient
make
in
up that
terms
time
of
on
dev.
the development side.
You may, yes, though, you may end up with more time spent in planning because you may have full interaction requirements and full wireframes for
Gotcha.
things that your client doesn't currently have budget for
Sure.
and isn't planning on having budget for until maybe 2 years down the road. But those phases are planned out, and that it's not wasted time. That is
I see what you're saying.
wires that can then be applied later.
Gotcha.
So yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find, and one of the issues I think that clients often don't know what they don't know. I mean, this is a whole mysterious black box to them as far as they're concerned. This is like trying to order a spaceship or something, right? And from their point of view, often the RFP is the part where the estimate gets done, where you tell them what you're going to bill.
Right.
And then for you to say, oh, now we have after you've already awarded us the contract, now is when we're going to find out what you're actually going to get.
Yeah.
That's the part where the conversation is difficult to have, especially because during the bidding process, you're basically competing with a whole bunch of other people. And if you don't promise them everything, then someone else will lie to them.
Well, I think
I mean, and so that's tricky. The best solutions we've been able to find for that are to put language in to the proposal that makes it clear that if certain conditions are not met, then these deliverables may not be possible to deliver within scope. Condition things, and
Yeah, you have to-
sometimes we try to contract for an initial phase that is doing the things you're doing, where we're doing the discovery and the drill down and getting to something, and that gives them some comfort that if we don't come to terms on a price to budget at the end of that process, whether they've only paid us for the discovery and recommendations, and then we can both go our separate ways if it doesn't work after that phase. But that's a real dilemma for us because I think sometimes clients use their ignorance as a weapon too. Like,
Yes.
I just assumed that everything would be included.
that's where it's important to really kind of be clear in your pre-sale phase that okay, we're looking at an RFP, we're going to provide a proposal, but we are going to be redefining your project with you as we go. And that's something that is within our proposal. We go through our process in the proposal. Maybe they don't read it, but it's in there. And it also is kind of explained in our contract in that. And then it's really, you just gotta kind of manage their expectations. I'm not supposed to take any more questions, but you still have one, so just one more.
Yeah, so looking back on your projects, I assume there are 500 to 1,000 hours. What's your percentage of, like the breakdown between your PM or maybe you group the PM and technical PM project time together, or do you separate that out? I'm just curious, like, what, retrospectively, what you guys come out with?
We don't, we don't group time together like that because oftentimes we're declaring time, first of all, on the same tickets. Like we generally will have like a client meetings ticket where, it could be her, it could be me, it could be developers or, like the UX designer. And the other thing is Cecily is also a developer. So she's not only a technical project manager, and so it's difficult to say whether her time was spent, without looking at the individual tickets that she's logged the time on.
So then, because my question would be, how much? There's some general guidelines on projects that say this much time to QA, this much time to PM. Just want to know, do you guys kind of find those general truths within 20-25% to be accurate?
I would say that probably, 20 to 25% for PM time is pretty accurate, but I'm also including in there a lot of the meetings.
Yeah.
Because I can, not just my time logged on a meeting, everybody's time logged on a meeting. So,
and sometimes it's maybe sort of technically PM work, it's logged on individual tickets if it's applicable. I tend to kind of play that by ear depending on what the situation is. So there may be some time that's I've spent on a project that's really sort of PM type stuff, but it gets logged on the ticket because it's so specific. But that 20-25% seems to hold pretty well.
Yeah, I think so too.
Even with both of us logging time on the ticket.
So, thank you.